So first order of business is to present the President's Award for Distinguished Contributions to Justice to Jody Owens II. First, the Justice Award is given annually to an individual or organization that through either a single initiative or over a longer period of time has made significant and distinguished contributions to the cause of justice. And I think that you will be convinced that Jody definitely fits that description. He is the director and managing attorney of the Mississippi office of the Southern Poverty Law Center. He leads the Mississippi efforts to reform the state's juvenile justice, educational, and mental health systems. He has successfully litigated class action lawsuits on behalf of children and adults throughout the Deep South in matters involving mass incarceration, private prisons, and the school prison pipeline. His work has brought to light horrific and unconstitutional conditions of confinement forced upon children and youth in many for-profit and public juvenile detention facilities, and he and his office have been tremendously effective in carrying out their work. For example, among some of their important accomplishments are the following. Litigating and winning 5 different class action lawsuits challenging conditions of confinement for juveniles in detention, raising the age for juvenile jurisdiction from 16 to 17, closing 2 juvenile detention facilities for their unconstitutional treatment of children, through litigation and policy reform, closing adult private prisons formerly operated by the GEO Corporation, and these prisons were nationally recognized. This prison was nationally recognized as one of the 10 worst prisons in America. Passing more than 12 legislative bills that affect kids at various levels of the criminal justice system. Passing legislation that reduced the population of the state training schools by 300%. Passing comprehensive criminal justice reform that altered both the sentencing schemes and the definition of state crimes, and on and on and on. They're just too numerous to count. Jody received his bachelor's degree. He's a graduate of Jackson State University, and he received his law degree from Howard University School of Law. He's a lieutenant in the United States Navy Reserves, and he's a very sought-after speaker on juvenile justice issues around the country. His time, I think I'll stop there. I think you get the picture, and it is my pleasure, Jody, to present this award to you and to give you some time to talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thanks to my dear friend, the Madam President, for allowing us to speak with you. Just briefly, probably the most important thing I would say in the few moments that I have is that I want to thank you all for the work you did. A few years ago, I got an opportunity to learn about all that goes into your field. But I can tell you that those of us who do policy work, those of us who litigate, could not be successful without hardworking people who are committing to providing data, to doing research, to publishing, to giving us so much authority to take that fight and be convincing, because facts still really do matter. So thank you. Now, I'll be honest, 2 months ago I was going to give a different talk. But some things changed, and I think it's important to not only talk about some of the work that the center does, but also to be honest with ourselves and look at we are a nation, a world where things have suddenly changed and what that looks like. We're in shock. We are a nation that's deeply divided on very serious criminal justice issues, and I think that people in our world certainly are thinking about what this means to all of us moving forward. What does the next 4 years look like? What does administrations look like with Attorney General Sessions, or who's going to be in charge of this cabinet and that cabinet? And I can tell you that there are a lot of people who are particularly disappointed, not because they lean one political way or another, but they're disappointed because what we see, the rhetoric, the people that are involved in making decisions is changing in so many ways. We have a candidate that has been elected president-elect of these United States who, during the campaign, said so many decisive things, so many things about immigrants, about Muslims, so many things that we found were not even true, but they were the type of thing that tapped into something differently. And in our world, we're struggling right now. What does this mean? Does it mean anything at all? What's next? We have a candidate that actually mocked people. We had a candidate that was chauvinistic. And it was all in this concept of making this country great. Now, one thing that I think we all can take solace in is realizing that this is not our first time here as a country. We dealt with this many moons ago, and then it was about states' rights and sovereignty. Other candidates were the same way. And this thing is going a little fast now. But what I would offer to you is that this center, Southern Poverty Law Center, on behalf of our founder, Morris Dees, and our president, Richard Cohen, we've been fighting fights differently for years, and many of you know us from this work right here. I work fighting the Klan, Aryan nations, taking them to court on all type of things civilly, but we've evolved because we realize the fight looks differently now. And many of you might not know that we're currently working with Silicon Valley against all the players on this slide, making sure that they are honest and true to their policies about eradicating hate, teaching tolerance, and seeking justice. We're working with iTunes and Amazon about making sure they're not collecting funds for hate music and hate gangs. We're working with PayPal and Twitter about who they're allowing to have accounts. We're even working with Google about what they use when people search and what comes up. Because we realize that when we look at things like the Dylann Roof shooting in South Carolina, there's so many ways that people are being impressed and affected by hate. Now, many of you also know about Teaching Tolerance magazine. It's something that we use because we realize that just like you, that before you can win anything in the courtroom, you must first win in the classroom. And Teaching Tolerance is a magazine. It's a division of ours. It's documentaries. This is my good friend, late, great Julian Bond, who's holding a Grammy because he narrated our first documentary that we ever had. And that division is just as important as anything we do in the courtroom because Teaching Tolerance is receiving magazines throughout the country. Every school in the country receives a magazine for free from us to help teachers and academians be equipped with what they need to be able to fight hate and teach tolerance. Now, this is one of my favorite slides. I just had to bring it because that's Cirilla. She's one of our clients. She lived in Mississippi some time ago, and when she had her daughter was taken from her because the allegation was that she was a prostitute. Our work has always been about realizing that those who are least vulnerable amongst us need protection. In fact, she was not a prostitute. What happened was she did not speak Spanish. She spoke an indigenous language that was similar to Spanish. So the translator in a small hospital in Mississippi who didn't understand what she was saying made it up. She lost her child for almost a year. We were successful in getting her child back, and we went to Mexico City ultimately to make those who were responsible pay the money for the loss of her child for a year. Our work also involves in protecting those individuals that we often don't get a chance to think are affected by what we all do. This slide is Ashley Diamond, who really suffered some tremendous horrors in the prison in Alabama because she was a transgender person. This is a slide from a conversion therapy place that we shut down in New York And this is important because we have a vice president-elect that really believes in these things. So when we think about how this is all connected, we need to appreciate that we have some serious concerns as we continue to do our work. And this is what's near and dear to me. Mississippi, when I first came to the Southern Poverty Law Center almost 7 years ago, was one of the worst places in the country for anyone to be incarcerated, especially our most vulnerable children. That's a real cell. That's what it looks like. That's how much space he has, and we now know more than ever with the adolescent brain science that this child cannot get better if anything was even wrong with that child in a place like this. So we've litigated those cases throughout Mississippi, and we've changed the landscape only to grow into the adult system. That right there is a door to a cell in the facility I'm currently litigating against in Mississippi called East Meridian Correctional Facility. It's a place where individuals who are incarcerated who have serious mental illnesses are housed. And it's so horrific of a place that my clients can often only get medical attention if they light something on fire inside their cell and throw it out so someone will have to come put the fire out. That's really happening in today's America. That's what it looks like. So when we think about our work and we think about why we're doing the work, it's for the people and individuals and families that will never know what this is like, but we realize that they are willing to set their cell on fire just to get some help. Because our people who are lost and forgotten in our prisons and our jails, they're still human beings that deserve basic constitutional standard of living. That same prison had a sister prison, Walnut Grove, and I'm so happy to announce that we this year shut that prison down. It was owned and operated by the GEO Corporation. Thank you. What I will tell you about that prison that I think is somewhat unique outside of the rapes and the fights and even the children who lost their lives in that prison, because it housed, at one point in time, it was the largest privately owned facility in the country that housed kids who were convicted as adults, is that when I would go into that place, I would come out stenching with smoke, marijuana, because there was so much contraband being brought in by the guards, because you can't really run a private prison unless you try to do it and make a profit off of it. And we know how you make the profits. You don't have staff, so you let the gangs run the prisons. And that's the sad face of where we are today. But as we continue to evolve in this work, we realize that there are different types of prisons. There's debtors' prisons. Our Economic Justice Division is currently litigating and working throughout the state to stop the practice of saying that because you're poor, you should be incarcerated. These are the type of things that we have to be concerned about in this new administration, because we know what was said. We also know not what just was said, we know what people have done and who people have put around them. Just in Mississippi 2 weeks ago, where I live, a black church was bombed in Greenville, Mississippi. It was burned with the insignia "Vote Trump" on the outside of it. Now, I'm not saying our president-elect is responsible for any of that, but I'm saying the rhetoric around these issues are things that we have to be aware of moving forward. What we've done at the center is that we've set up a website to document and collect all recent hate incidents related to this post-election spike. So far, we already have 400 of those in just a week. And the scary thing about this is that the intimidation and harassment it's affecting everyone. Anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-Black, anti-immigrant. And what's scarier is that it's happening everywhere. It's happening in our schools, it's happening in grocery stores, it's happening while you're driving in your car. Just last week, one of our clients was with her kids to the grocery store. They were 9 and 11. And someone had the audacity to approach this woman by herself and say, "Your kids are going to be terrorists," because of how they looked. We have much work to do, particularly when we look at who is going to be in this administration and what that looks like. Some of it speaks for itself. I know you know some of these same people, so I don't have to say much, but what I would tell you is that when this mock paper came out, this was almost 4 or 5 months ago. This was a joke then. It actually says April 2017, a day that hadn't come. But just recently, we heard about 3 million of our brothers and sisters in this country being deported. So it's real. What I would offer to you also is a disgusting approach to our LGBT brothers and sisters right now. What we're hearing is that people are excited to know that people's rights will be smaller than they ever have been before. So what we're doing right now is really looking at how we can work with this administration and make sure that we call out what's happening. we did a survey, and we sent it to every teacher who subscribes to our Teaching Tolerance magazine. And we didn't mention names. We just asked, what has the election meant to your classroom? And every teacher indicated there's been an extreme uptick in bullying. So what does this mean when we're teaching a generation of kids to be mean, to be scared, to worry about walls, to worry about, am I going to be deported, or is my parents going to be deported? We have serious work to do. So one of the things that Morris and Richard came up with is that they wanted to look, there's only so much we can do, but what we can do matters. And we do know that our president-elect does care a lot about his brand. So we thought it appropriate to ask him to speak on these issues, to say you don't want hate, you don't want bigotry, and we have to put a stop to this. And I'm almost finished here, but I want to hit two more small points. Dissension is good. When we have the number of protesters on the streets right now, we again realize we have a very divided country. But I think this slide is important, not for what you see there, but for what you see here. More than 100 million people did not vote in this election they could have. 100 million. So 43.1% decided to stay at home. Why is that? Why do we feel that way? Just one more time, because I think it's appropriate to show. I mean, my goodness, if 100 million people think they don't have anything of interest, what is our responsibility? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm a boy from Mississippi that grew up in the church a lot, okay? But what I would tell you is that when you're preaching to the choir, sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we have a lot of work to do, to show people they have a reason to care, a reason to matter, and they realize that all these policies that we've talked about just then are things that affect all of us. So in closing, I want to share with you the outside of our headquarters at Montgomery. If you've not been there, we have a Civil Rights Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and this is a monument that means a lot to all of us. In that circle is all the incidents in the civil rights, people who were killed, churches that were bombed, people who lost their lives. And the most important part, I think, of that monument is the part that's purposefully blank. It's a reminder to us that the civil rights movement didn't begin with the passage of the Brown v. Board of Education that allowed public education for all in this country. And it certainly didn't end with the assassination of Dr. King. The civil rights movement still lives and exists today in this country and also in our work. And like you, I hope you know that us at the center will continue to fight, and we need your help along the way, into, in the words of the Prophet Amos and Dr. King, that this speaks for itself, until justice rolls down like a mighty river and righteousness like a mighty stream. So thank you for listening. Thank you for the work you do again, and thank you for having the opportunity to be with you. Thank you.
Wow, it's really bright up here. That's a hard act to follow for me, introducing Ruth, and for Ruth. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it anyways. We're on a roll. Okay, so I'm so pleased and proud to be up here today to introduce my dearest friend, longtime collaborator, and the president of the American Society of Criminology, Ruth Peterson. This is a historic moment with Ruth as the first African-American president of our association. Something that I can tell you all agree has taken too long to happen. It's also momentous. Okay, we're going to get through this so we can get to the end, so we can get to the drinks. It's also momentous because Ruth is actually still speaking to me, even though my Chicago Cubbies finally won the World Series after 100 years, but they had to do so by beating Ruth's Cleveland Indians. So Ruth and I, have worked together, laughed together, bitched together, and supported lots of you, side by side, each in our own ways. But this was something she had to think about, whether she could get beyond. So in introducing Ruth, though, I could certainly tell you about all of her accomplishments in awards, professional service, publications, grants, and the like. But you probably know a lot about all of that already. So instead, I want to introduce Ruth as the great person, scholar, and colleague that she is. So I met Ruth a bit more than 30 years ago when we were both hired as assistant professors of sociology at Ohio State University. She already knew my husband, Bob, who was hired at the same time, and we were all friends from the start. But my friendship with Ruth went well beyond hanging out, supporting each other in our roles as junior faculty members, and drinking Bob's infamous margaritas. Some of you have tasted them. Before long, we thought that we should try working together, as my training and interests in urban segregation and inequality seemed like an important and natural linkage to fruitfully combine with Ruth's intellectual concerns with structural inequality and crime. So some of you have already heard this story, so if you have, bear with me if you're one of those people. But Ruth, ever the one with grandiose ideas that I can rarely say no to, says, so why don't we write a book? I said, for once, with my head screwed on, that perhaps we should write an article and see if we're still getting along. Well, Ruth agreed to humor me, and we did write that first article, which was published in Social Forces in 1993. But ultimately, we wrote that book too, since clearly Ruth was right. We needed to do so. Well, for those of you who know Ruth, you will recognize her in this story. She knows what's important. She knows how to get it done, and she knows how to bring us all along on the ride to make it happen. In the meantime, she doesn't put up with anything less than the best from each and every one who has the great pleasure to know and work with her, or under her tutelage. Just ask her former graduate students and anyone who's participated in our Summer Research Institute during the 10 years it was at Ohio State. So how does this all come about? I'm really going to get to the end. How does this all come about? Just with a few simple comments to the right people, and then a lot of hard work and nudging of everyone to get with the program. So let me just give you a very few examples. Ruth said, I'm tired of seeing so many scholars of color and others who are underrepresented in the academy failing. We have to do something about that. So we did. We established the Racial Democracy, Crime, and Justice Network and its Summer Research Institute for assistant professors from underrepresented groups, which have had remarkable results. Or she said that we clearly can't understand the distinct roles of racial and economic processes in the distribution of urban crime by continuing to study just one or a few cities. So let's collect neighborhood crime data needed to do it right for a nationally representative set of cities, 91 cities that is. So we did that too. And somehow she got me to do it again with my now dear collaborators, Maria Velez and Christopher Lyons. And what about the fact that the ASC hasn't had an African American president? I will run and win and do what I can to shake it up and make sure we know that it does matter that diverse voices and perspectives be heard loud and clear in the ASC, even though Ruth is formally retired and should be walking on a beach in Tahiti today. So hopefully many of you have experienced the outgrowth of these sentiments at the meeting this year with our amazing plenaries and the justice outreach that Ruth made sure that we spearheaded here in New Orleans, the city that is so marked by Katrina and Rita and a long and raw history of racial injustice. Of course, for those of you who already know Ruth, you probably know and love all of this about her already. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to get to know her personally, or who know her only through her publications, I hope that you can begin to feel all of this about her and about the love and respect that she generates to the betterment of us all. But enough of me talking about Ruth. I know her, and she does not want me to go on any longer. So let's get to it and hear what she has to say to shake it up and keep us on our toes about the important issues confronting us as criminologists today in her presidential address, Interrogating Race, Crime, and Justice in a Time of Racial Tension. Thank you.
She did the speech, so I don't have to stand here for long. Okay. I want to begin tonight's talk by thanking Lori for the introduction, for being my academic partner for nearly 25 years. She said 30, I guess it's been 30 years, and for serving with Catherine Russell Brown as program chair for this wonderful meeting. Lori and Catherine and the great program committee that they put together are due full credit for the organization and success of the program that we've enjoyed. I'm forever grateful to them, along with Andrea Leverance, Marianne Fisher-Giorlando, Holly Brem, Xiaoxing Cheng, Kelly Frailing, and Volkan Topali, who served as the local arrangements committee. They provided us with great information and suggestions for enjoying NOLA. Thanks to all the committee chairs and members that worked on behalf of the Society during 2015 and 16. I want to call all of their names, but I know better. I do want them, though, to have full credit for the work carried out under the auspices of my presidency. For I can truly say that my most important contribution to the Society this year was putting together very fine committees to do all the work while I sat back and, I guess, traveled to Tahiti. And Jody Owens, I want to thank you so very much for your work. In the world of crime and criminal justice, little seems more important to me than efforts to assist young people in their plights to gain a little stake in this great society and to eventually become productive adult citizens. This means that we have to do all that we can to bring a measure of humanity even to those who are in trouble with the law. Thank you for doing your part and for setting an example for others to emulate. We can see from your comments the extent to which you are in the trenches, and I commend you for your commitment, hard work, and jobs well done. Finally, I want to thank all members of the ASC for providing me with this opportunity to serve as president. Being president of ASC is an honor and a rare privilege, and I don't take it for granted. I'm also quite aware that the society itself positioned me for this role by providing many opportunities that propelled me forward and helped to bring me to this moment. In fact, there's a very large number of senior and peer scholars to thank that have engaged with me, shared ideas, sponsored me into various roles, supported my activities, or who otherwise have made it possible for me to succeed. I didn't even try to start making a list. It would have been far too long. But I hope that you know who you are and know that I am grateful to each of you, individually and collectively, for being the village that helped to turn this criminologist. I thank you all. For the remainder of my time, and if I learn to use this, there we go. I hope to make two general points related to the theme of this year's annual meeting, the many colors of crime and justice. First, I seek to pay tribute to the contributions to criminology and criminal justice of people of color, particularly African Americans, but also other groups, Latinos, American Indians, underrepresented Asians, and the like. Second, in light of real-world crime and justice events and activities that signal a certain amount of unease and racial tension in contemporary society, I want to suggest a few directions that I think might be fruitful for us to begin to take. I see these two purposes of my talk as interrelated in ways that render it something of a hybrid of messages that are distinct in some ways, but that cannot actually stand alone, separate from one another. In other words, I hope that you gather from my talk how and why I see it as beneficial to further democratize both the study of crime and justice, broadly speaking, and the American Society of Criminology. In her introduction, Lori, and elsewhere, Catherine and Lori, have drawn attention to the fact that I am the first African American and African American woman to hold this office of ASC president. They view this as a cause for celebration, and I appreciate their point of view. But I also want to acknowledge that I am sharing this journey with Lorenzo Boyd, who is in the middle of his term as the first African American man to serve as president of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. However, Lorenzo is not the first Black president of ACJS. That honor goes to Janice Joseph, who was president in 2009 and 10. Here, I want to set being the first African American president of ASC in context for the historical record as I have lived it as a member of this society. And that is by acknowledging the work of a few African American scholars on whose broad shoulders I have stood and continue to stand. For starters, those of you who are familiar with my work, with Lori, will know that for the past 20, 25 years, it has been grounded in the thinking and prior work of two African American scholars who are not thought of as criminologists. They are namely sociologist Dr. William E. B. Du Bois and Dr. William Julius Wilson. In an effort to shed light on varying crime patterns across groups and neighborhoods of different colors, I have tried to bring research to bear on their perspectives, particularly this idea from 1899 that crime is a phenomenon that stands not alone, but rather as a symptom of countless wrong social conditions. And this question, this issue of the sources of crime potentially being remarkably invariant across race and rooted instead in the structural differences among communities, cities, and states in economic and family organization. We have been particularly interested in Wilson and Sampson and Wilson's claims about the role of social isolation and extreme disadvantage, and then in this issue that Sampson and Wilson raise together. Second, I dedicate this talk and this moment to the memory of Corme Ritchie Mann and Laura Fishman, two strong and gifted African American women criminologists, or as Gloria Naylor may have described them, hard-edged, soft-centered, brutally demanding, and easily pleased, these pioneering women of color. They came, they went, grew up, and grew old beyond their years, like an ebony phoenix, each in her own time and with her own season, had a story. Their entries into the field preceded mine by only a tiny bit, and I have no doubt that had they lived longer, or had they been my exact contemporaries, one of both of them would have been elected to the office that I now hold. As it stands, they were pioneers whose legacies include three common characteristics: a body of cutting-edge scholarship on issues that continue to be significant, a tradition of working hard to sponsor and bring young scholars along, and active involvement in assisting community organizations in serving justice populations and their families. Corme was prolific and her scholarship covered a variety of crime and justice concerns: criminal offending, unequal justice, female crime, how images of color shape images of crime and outcomes of justice. And she challenged all of us to take a comprehensive approach to understanding disparities by relying on broad societal theories and bringing both quantitative and qualitative evidence to bear on the issues investigated. Laura's early work focused on an important collateral consequence of incarceration: family members, as she put it, doing time on the outside. Research on this issue has surged in recent years as attention to what is termed mass incarceration and its consequences has caught hold. However, Laura laid the groundwork for these more recent studies in her 1990 book, Women at the Wall, a study of prisoners' wives doing time on the outside. During the later part of her career, she took up the challenge of exploring issues related to prisoners and HIV/AIDS. These studies focus on African American and Latino prisoners mainly, and often examine issues related to their family and peer relations. In thinking about pioneering criminologists, I would be remiss if I did not also offer shout-outs to Julius Devereaux and Darnell Hawkins, who, like Cora May and Laura, preceded my entry into the field by only a small amount. Julius taught many of us lessons about how to sponsor young scholars. He has also been a model of institution building and how to give back to organizations that are instrumental in your success, including ASC. And Darnell and I had overlapping research interests from the outset. Along with John Hagan's prior work, his analyses of racial disparities in criminal justice set the stage for my dissertation project and the other work that I undertook on sentencing during the early part of my career. It is still difficult to conduct a study of racial disparities without having to wrestle with one or more of the methodological or theoretical critiques that Darnell offers as he continues to write and publish on race, crime, and justice. And Darnell and I sat in a lot of rooms together in doing our national service for on behalf of the discipline. And I benefited tremendously from his knowledge and his wisdom. So I thank both Julius and Darnell for their pioneering efforts and for being there to assist all of us who followed them and now serve in the field with them. Robert Crutchfield and Vernetta Young are my African American criminology contemporaries. We came into the field around the same time, have stood together on many platforms, and share a commitment to helping to diversify both the organizations, all the organizations in which we participate, universities, research organizations, ASC, etc. Our initial substantive foci varied, though my questions have always overlapped a bit with both of theirs. Bob focused in on inequality in crime and punishment, with particular attention to the role of labor markets, employment, and jobs at both individual and aggregate levels, and for both youth and adults. Vernetta took up the charge of gender, race, and criminal justice. And along the way, as we all three were going along, you might have overheard conversations between us about how we were going to survive as African Americans in this particularly very white criminological world. But we have survived, and in the process, contributed some important findings while also working together, a la Cora May and Laura, to improve the environment and create infrastructures for the success of scholars of color who come after us. I am grateful to these kindred spirits for the contributions that they have made as individual scholars and for being supportive of colleagues and others along the way. Turning back to Catherine and Lori, I say again that I am grateful to have my ASC presidency acknowledged as a mark of progress for the society and the discipline. At the same time, I believe that ASC is a progressive organization. Therefore, I am certain that I will not be the last African American president, and that I and future African American presidents will be joined by presidents of many colors, including Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, and the like. We shall not be one and done. During ASC's 2011 annual meeting, I had the privilege of giving the Edwin H. Sutherland address. I assumed that the address would be my swan song to the field. Thus, I spoke to you about the direction that I believe studies of crime and criminal justice should take. I call for placing race and ethnicity at the center of crime and justice studies, regardless of the particular focus and whether your goal was to understand disparate patterns across race and ethnic groups. Essentially, this call was a request for scholars to embed assessments of crime and justice within an understanding of broad, structured societal inequality, and as such, to recognize that race and ethnicity are organizing principles within society, and as such, they are structural conditions that create criminogenic conditions, the responses to crime, and the consequences that flow from these responses. I tried to illustrate the value of this structural approach with findings from the series of studies that Lori and I have undertaken to account for disparities in neighborhood crime across communities of different colors. This is also the approach that members of the Racial Democracy Crime and Justice Network have taken and recommend that we take. And they have laid out a specific research agenda for developing a broader and deeper understanding of the relationship between race and ethnicity and crime and justice in the book, The Many Colors of Crime. Although I still consider the Sutherland Address to be my most fundamental statement to the society, a year later, at the 2012 meeting, and following in the wake of the killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman and its aftermath, I shared the podium with urban ethnographer Elijah Anderson to discuss the implications of the case for criminological research. Eli argued that events like the Martin Zimmerman incident stem from the fear-inducing image of Blacks that come from the fact that many members of this group reside in what he terms the iconic ghetto, that is, disadvantaged urban areas that have come to symbolize the impoverished, crime-prone, drug-infested, violent areas of the city where, in the minds of many, the Black people live. My comments were focused on what kinds of research and research approaches would be required to assess the merits of Eli's claim. And once again, I call for a structural race approach to the study of crime and justice. Well, here we are. Oops, I left out some slides there. Here we are 4 years later, and I'm still singing the same song. You get nothing new from me. At this point, though, the Trayvon Martin case seems long ago. But in my mind, it also marks a starting point for numerous highly publicized cases of young Black males dying prematurely under circumstances that render a lot of us ill at ease about the state of race relations in this country, the state of criminal justice in this country, and the state of criminal justice knowledge. Most of the highly publicized cases involved police officers killing Black males in contexts where they claim that their own lives are being threatened. By now, some of the cases are so familiar that simply reciting the names of those killed, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, bring up uneasy images of how they were killed and raise questions regarding the meaning of their deaths in the context of a society where one of the fundamental principles is equality before the law. Adding to the mix are killings of women and girls of color by police, and also killings of police officers that some say show racial motivations in reverse. Given the volume of incidents, and helped by the considerable media attention that some have received, such killings are having an influence in everyday society. That influence includes the assembly of databases to track the numbers and circumstances of such killings by The Guardian and by The Washington Post. Discussions on the right and left for changes in laws and legal procedures. Protest demonstrations and national social movements and counter movements. Black Lives Matter, #SayHerName, the Yarn Mission. And dare I say, another impact is growing recognition that it may really be time to put race and ethnicity at the forefront of the study of crime and justice. Thus, in this final statement to the criminology scholars, I want to follow up on the earlier two talks by identifying several specific ways that I believe that criminologists might be able to contribute scholarship that would be timely and that would help to inform some of these ongoing discussions. So the following are my suggestions. I don't want to go too much over. The first is let's start by taking stock of criminological understandings of how race, ethnicity, crime, and justice are related. Race and ethnic disparities in crime and justice patterns are long-standing observations of criminologists. This is true regardless of the topic under consideration. However, where are we in terms of our understanding of how these disparities come to be? Do the recurring observations mean that scholars have made no progress in explaining them, or society little progress in addressing them? Do the disparities observed in the 21st century, today, reflect the same kinds of causes and have the same kinds of consequences as disparities observed in the earlier 19th and 20th centuries? I'm not sure about the answers to these questions, but I'm fairly certain that the distributions of crime and justice patterns, neither the distribution of crime and justice patterns nor the research is that static. So in my view, it would be timely and important for scholars to take stock of what is known and not known about the linkages among race and ethnicity and crime and justice. At this historical point, with an eye to how things have changed over time and what patterns imply regarding the links between criminal justice outcome, inequality in society, and groups' ability to participate and engage socially in the society. So here I have in mind work similar to that undertaken by the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on incarceration. That effort set in context the knowledge base and the meaning that should be attached to high rates of incarceration in our society. And I want to try to give you one example of what I kind of mean by taking stock here. Perspectives on what appear to be racialized processes in criminal justice outcomes, for example, these police killings or arrests and that, have evolved over time. One contemporary viewpoint is that they are no longer the product of racial animus. They are no longer the product of antagonism based on skin color and racial heritage. In earlier periods, especially in the South where I grew up, events such as the police killing of black suspects or others that have caused controversy, that might have caused controversy today, would likely have been inscribed in law, justified in public policy, and enforced through violence condoned and tolerated by white society. But today's racial bias is argued to be implicit, more about the reactive side of individual minds than conscious racial animus. This is the same kind of explanation, really, that Anderson was offering in contrasting the death of Trayvon Martin at the hands of George Zimmerman in 2012 with that of Emmett Till, which occurred in 1955. And it is also a theme that comes across in a recent volume that flowed from the Martin-Zimmerman incident. Several papers in Deadly Injustice, Trayvon Martin, Race and Criminal Justice, and the Criminal Justice System describe the core of contemporary racism in terms of racial aversion and latent bias operating primarily at the unconscious level. And people have begun doing research. There's a growing body of research on implicit bias, some of which focuses directly on bias in policing. But this particular argument is an interesting one because it suggests that basically we all hold implicit bias about people of color, and particularly about blacks. So when, where, and under what circumstances are these implicit biases activated or turned into biased behaviors and discriminatory actions? We need those kinds of taking stock times to address that kind of question, to know what we know. In an inequitable society like ours, how does the criminal justice system organize their own work and treat individuals with whom they come in contact in this context with the realization of this implicit bias? So we need work that goes beyond identifying the presence of implicit bias to understand how it particularly operates and how does it generate what appears to be sort of discriminatory basis, actions in that. So my thinking is that we need to know where we are and how and what we need to know in order to know how this implicit bias, which if it's real is doing a lot of damage, gets translated into explicit actions, I would say. To me, stock-taking endeavors force us to raise the issue of how confident should we be in the findings and conclusions of scholars, whether they're showing negative or positive effects. And I want to know what it is that we actually know, what don't we know, and what do we need to know, and how are we going to go about figuring that out. So I hopefully that example was not too ridiculous. So using what we learn from taking stock, our next step should be to undertake directed research to answer looming general questions. And in doing so, I think that we should take the advice of Barbara Reskin, who was in her presidential address to the American Sociological Association, argued that we need to go beyond showing the links between race and ethnicity and particular outcomes to really being able to identify and adequately describe the causal mechanisms. And that we haven't gone far enough in doing that. In some areas of crime and justice, we've gone very far, but in other areas, we still need to do more of that, looking at the mechanisms work. But she has also argued that we need to move beyond sort of the idea that one structure stands alone in its interface with racial disparities or individuals. She provides a systems analysis of why disparities persist in any place. She's arguing that disparities persist because they are simultaneously relevant to multiple domains: residential locations, schooling, employment, health, housing, credit, justice. And she argues that these domains are reciprocally related and comprise an integrated system, and that racial discrimination becomes a sort of emergent property, reinforcing the effects of the individual components of that system. So to advance, attempts to advance racial justice, she believes, fails because they don't take into account this sort of system fact. Rather, we develop ad hoc policy responses that focus on a given domain without attention to the need to identify and intervene at leverage points, implement interventions simultaneously that operate across many subsystems, isolate subsystems from the larger discrimination system, and so forth. So she is concerned that we have an uber system of discrimination, and that we need to be thinking much broader and harder about how it works, and that you can't assume that it stands alone in a particular institution. Now, criminology and criminal justice scholars recognize the potential interrelatedness of subsystems of the justice system, at least, policing, prosecution, courts, probation, etc. We try to link the what looks like inequality at one level with inequality at another. We're not always very successful because we can't follow people all the time across things and that. But we don't, I think, go enough beyond the justice system, even if we're taking multiple agencies of justice into account, to link back to all these other systems that Barbara is suggesting are at work. And we don't have yet a theory from which to begin to evaluate whether or not we have this Uber system. So, I think that that's one direction that we also want to take at this point in time. And I think that in one system that we want to pay close attention to is the lawmaking apparatus itself and the state functions that state policies and federal policies as a part of that whole Uber system idea. An additional concern in efforts to explain how and why race and ethnicity and crime and justice are associated is a lack of appropriate data for addressing some issues. Those of us who do neighborhood crime have had to wrestle with the data problem because there's no national database that includes crime counts for areas below the police department level. And you heard Lori complain already that I'm making her go to various police departments to gather data all over again. And, but that's what you have to do if you want to know about change over time in neighborhood crime. We also hear that we hear this about these studies, these police killings, or the Trayvon Martin type, not the Trayvon Martin type incident, but the other incidents. No database, a law enforcement database at least, for assessing what's happening in these cases. I find it troubling that I'm glad they're doing it, The Guardian and The Washington Post, making available these databases with information on lethal encounters in which citizens are killed by police officers. But I find it ironic that we are relying on two news organizations to provide records of shootings and the circumstances surrounding them. On the one hand, I think we can get some different kinds of information from them, such as information from witnesses' points of view and that. And I think that would be nice additional information, but I think that it is important to get official law enforcement records as well. And I say that because I worry that if we don't, I think there are several worries for me. It seems like data on the crimes, especially crime, data on killings, especially killings involving law enforcement, should be sort of a public good kind of piece of information. We shouldn't have to rely on private organizations to gather that information for us. It's part of the accountability of the, or should be a part of the accountability of the organizations. Also, it might help to avoid suspicion that police and police departments are covering up inappropriate or unlawful behavior by not reporting such incidents, and thereby adding to the mistrust of law enforcement. And the Guardian and the Washington Post can stop doing this at any time that they want. We want this information to be consistently gathered over time and so forth. So I worry a little bit about that kind of stuff. Those are just two examples of concern about availability of data. I am aware that efforts are being undertaken now to address both of those examples. But my point is that when we are trying to find answers to sensitive questions that reflect on race-ethnic disparities and the relationship between race and crime and justice, it is important to have relevant data to answer the questions. Thus, as we go forward in trying to make sense of race-ethnic disparities, we should be mindful of what our data limitations are, and we should be speaking up in requesting important types of data when opportunities arise. Otherwise, we will make very limited progress in improving our knowledge base on some important issues. And my final recommendation brings us back to thinking about the contributions of scholars of color. Recently, Bob Crutchfield and I had occasion to comment on how much more colorful the membership of ASC seems compared to when he and I first started attending these meetings. Back then, among the African American portion, we all knew one another, we could call each other by name, and we could sit in one little corner of any room. This is no longer the case. We do not know the names of all people of color in the association, and lots of them don't know who we are. There's been growth in Latino scholars and so forth. So scholars of color are a growing part of our society. Nonetheless, we are still underrepresented in ASC and in the field. And as well, our research questions, approaches, and interpretations of patterns of crime and justice are underrepresented in the mainstream of crime and justice literature. Our profession has not spent much time investigating itself. Therefore, it is difficult to know just how underrepresented. But the figures that you see suggest that we are not a very big part of the group. Jody Miller and Rod Bronson tried to use the, I guess it's the reports that the forms that we fill out when we take out our membership. They tried to see what portion of the ASC is of different racial groups. And they found that collectively, non-whites make up only about 19% of our association's members, with blacks and Asians being the largest of those two of that 19%, with about 6% each. And then Latinos are another 5%, Native Americans 1%, and then there are another 1% that identify as other. And it's not just that we are and as we go along, as you move across the stages of career, we get smaller and smaller, right? The proportions get smaller and smaller. And that's true for other social sciences, too, that train criminologists. And unfortunately, the problem of underrepresentation is not limited to the composition of the field. The research contributions of scholars of color tend not to work their way into the mainstream of the discipline. As Sean Gabadon and his colleagues have noted regarding the status of African Americans in criminology and criminal justice, Black scholars do not receive due recognition for their work. Their research is less likely to be published in prestigious mainstream journals, cited in other published works, discussed in textbooks, or taken into account by policymakers and the mainstream media. They conclude that the devaluing of African American scholarship, coupled with Black scarcity in doctoral granting institutions on editorial boards and in other leadership positions within predominantly white universities, have detrimental consequences for, among other things, understanding crime and justice and addressing problems related to crime and criminal justice treatment that are disproportionately borne by Blacks. I'm not sure what the situation is for Latinos, but I suspect that, as always, it's similar, but perhaps not as intense. These types of underrepresentation seem to me potentially quite consequential for understanding. We need to account for the thinking and research findings of scholars of all colors in the interpretations and conclusions that we draw about the meaning and importance of crime and justice patterns. For one thing, scholars of color are often familiar with the population and communities being studied in a different way than our white colleagues. This means that by excluding scholars and their work, we may be excluding different yet valuable insights about perspectives on and approaches to investigating patterns of crime and justice that might be very useful. Indeed, we know from studies of perceptions of crime and criminal justice that people of different colors have different interpretations of crime and justice events and often offer different kinds of explanations of participation in crime as offenders and victims. So it is important to air alternative explanations and to measure and analyze them as competing explanations alongside one another. Also, excluded researchers may be asking fundamental questions that grow out of their specific experiences that could lead to basic and very important findings. In my own case, I would not say that I have homegrown experience with crime in urban communities of color, but most of the questions on which my own career is based have been almost embarrassingly fundamental. Nonetheless, they were being overlooked in the mainstream. I could not overlook them because I had difficulty buying into the conclusions from other work. So they often seem oddly unrecognizable to me as an accounting for race patterns. I think that if that is true for other scholars of color, we may be missing out on a lot of fundamental information by not having their work be embedded into the mainstream of the rest of criminology. Now, I have a long list in this thing, and I'm going to skip it because I know it's time to party. But I have a long list of issues that have been taken up by scholars of color that for sure would not have been taken up if they were not scholars of color. And I'll just give you one example to tell you what I mean. But in my address that comes out published, I'll have a long list of all these things that we wouldn't have known if scholars of color didn't take them up. I'll just give the first example that I have on here. The role of Black child savers in the early juvenile court movement. Who would have thought of that otherwise? And again, I have a long list. So I'm going to skip it and get to the conclusion here so we can all get some food and drink. Okay. So this is what I've said, that scholars of color have long contributed to ASC in the field of criminology. As well, the society in the field has grown in its color composition over the past several decades. And for me, this is very, very gratifying. But scholars of color are still underrepresented proportionately and in the degree to which their work is given credit and attention. So we need to improve on that situation. Second, the contemporary period and racial tensions bring attention to the need for research to better account for race and ethnic disparities in criminal justice outcome. And I think that an important starting point is doing that taking stock, then following up by worrying about process and how the justice Uber works with the rest of the systems. We have a long way to go on that one, but I believe that the benefits of attention to those issues will pay off in helping us to provide a broader and deeper understanding of crime and justice issues. By proceeding, let's see. And in the end, that should mean a lower likelihood of developing policies that are themselves discriminatory or add in some way to existing disparities. Okay. I don't know where I am, but I'm going to close. Now, I can tell you that before I'll put up the conclusions so you can see them. Okay, so. I wrote this talk, but after the election, I must say I was concerned that in light of the outcome of the election, that I should worry about whether this was the message, that we should just keep doing the business of research. Maybe there's something more that criminologists should become in order to help deal with all of the injustice or the inequity in crime and criminal justice. But as once I was here, while here in New Orleans, I learned that the Oxford Dictionary, the international, has chosen an international word of the year, and it's called post-truth. And post-truth is an adjective describing situations where facts are disregarded in the face of emotional appeals. This made me realize that it may be even more important than ever to keep up our work to uncover the true stories that are based in the diverse and often oppressive realities faced by people in the United States and around the world in relation to crime and justice. And I was gratified in this realization by the justice reform activists, the civil rights attorneys, and the local justice officials that participated in our plenaries, and also by Jody's comments earlier today, because they all, in every one of those plenaries, they asked us to continue our work, and to find the data, to give them factual information that they can embed with their work and get better outcomes as they go along. So I stand by my talk that I was ready to toss out, except I couldn't have tossed it out because I couldn't have written another one in any case. And I would, we want to make Janae Nelson asked that we make this information available so that we can look toward a system that she termed one with the humanity of law and the order of justice, rather than simply working toward law and order. So I think that we need to make sure that post-truth does not become the rule of the day. Thank you. That was my last act as president of the ASC.
Don't be so happy.
I'm turning this over to my dear friend, Jim Lynch, who is the incoming president.
as everybody heads towards the door, it reminds me of one of my classes. So it's, I just, oh, I'm sorry. I think as Ruth and Cody have said, I think we're all looking forward to this next year with much great, both individually and as a society, with which much greater, and let me say, anticipation than we have of any year in my memory. And so a year from now, when we convene in Philadelphia, many, many things now uncertain will be settled. But for tonight, I think we should respect the old New Orleans adage of let the good times roll. So.
I'll take that. Thank you so much.
All right, see you.